Hello and welcome back to the Wasteland, everybody. Welcome back to Fallout New Vegas, where today we're going to be doing another tier list for Fallout New Vegas. This time we're going to be taking a look at all the different ammunition types that you can get in Fallout New Vegas, and we're going to be ranking them. This is actually one thing that is really cool about Fallout New Vegas, is that there is so many different options here for the different ammo types that we get, and that does make them pretty unique in their own way. So let's go over each of these, and we do have 4 categories for these. These aren't normal categories, because almost all this ammunition can be useful as opposed to having no ammunition for the weapon. So we've got the Wasteland Best at the top. This is the top tier premium whatever ammo we get for whatever caliber we have. We have Survivor's Choice. These ones are generally upgrades, can be a little bit situational though. Then we've got the side grade ammo. This is pretty much every normal ammo and around normal ammo. Might be good for something, might be bad for other things. This really depends on the guns that it goes to. And then we have the scrap metal tier for this ammo that's just not really the best. So let's go over some more standardized ammo first, then we'll get into the specialty ammos. So our very first one is the standard ammo, and standard ammo is going to go right to the side grade. So this is what everything's going to be judged on based on just the normal standard ammo for every weapon. So every weapon pretty much has normal ammunition with a few exceptions to this. And we do kind of have those all throughout this. We'll go over them as we go. But standard ammo is generally, for most weapons, not for all weapons, but for most weapons, usually 1 times damage and no modifiers on there. It usually doesn't have armor piercing, it usually doesn't do extra damage. There is a few that do this, like the energy cells, which we'll talk about here once we get down to them. But for the most part, this is just standard ammunition, and most of the time this is fine. Standard ammo is usually the most common type of ammo that you can get for weapons. There are a few exceptions to this, like 4570 sometimes sells more hollow points. There's sometimes armor piercing that's a little bit more common. There's sometimes surplus that's a little bit more common. But most vendors are going to sell some sort of standard ammunition to be loading into your guns. Then we've got armor piercing rounds, which these ones I'm actually going to put into the Wasteland's Best. Armor piercing rounds are generally an upgrade over standard rounds by quite a bit, because this almost always gives you minus 15 to enemies' damage threshold, which is pretty good. That makes so you can punch through effectively 15 armor with this. It can be a little bit higher with certain other ammo types like the 5mm, which we'll talk about here, but generally it's 15 armor breaking for having minus 5% total damage loss. This usually is an upgrade over most of the stronger enemies. There are a couple enemies that don't have any armor that are still quite strong, like Cazadors don't have any armor, and in which case hollow points would be much better for them. But in the case of like Deathclaws, they have 15 armor, the giant rad scorpions have 18 armor on them. Heavily armored enemies and medium armored enemies tend to have between, like 12 and up to 20, 25-ish at the highest points in armor, so armor piercing rounds can be really good against them. If you're not fighting armored enemies, then you don't need to have armor piercing, but it's always good to have armor piercing on you depending on whatever weapon you're using. Hollow points I'm going to put into the Survivor's Choice. Hollow points are a little bit different, and this is for general hollow points. For certain weapons, hollow points can be just a straight upgrade, like for 4570 or for 308, where all those guns do such high damage that giving the enemy 3 times the amount of armor doesn't really matter, because you're still going to be getting a buff in damage from the 75% bonus. However, certain other weapon types, hollow point rounds are not always the best. If you're throwing this in like the 22, or you're throwing it into some other low damaging weapons, sometimes just the amount of armor that it gives enemies can be a bit too much. If you're fighting non-armored enemies, then hollow points are always going to be a really good option. So again, things like Cazadors, or I believe fire geckos don't have any extra armor. I don't think any of the geckos have extra armor. Or like Yaoguais, I don't think they have extra armor. I could be wrong about that. But hollow points are pretty good for most enemy types. It's just once you get to humanoid enemies where hollow points can be potentially not as good. Alright, now that those are out of the way, let's go on to some of the more specific ammos where we have 22 plinking. Now 22 plinking is actually just a straight downgrade to 22, but you can buy this in bulk. This one nerfs your damage by 15%. This can only go to 22 caliber guns, and there is only 2 of those, with the 22 pistol and the 22 submachine gun. Both of them have low base damage, so lowering their base damage by a little bit more doesn't necessarily hurt them a whole lot, at least if you're fighting non-armored enemies. Then the 22s can struggle against armored enemies, so plinking rounds are, I'm gonna put them into the scrap metal tier, but they're not that bad most of the time. They still let you have decent damage towards most enemies, and you can usually buy a lot of them, which is kind of useful if you want to do a 22 caliber only run, which is a very fun run, but it's not really one of the strongest. You will probably be relying on plinking rounds a decent amount. Next up, we have the 308 jacketed soft point rounds. This is one of the rounds that you get from the perk Handloader. You do need to have that perk to actually unlock a lot of these rounds, but jacketed soft points for the 308 used to actually be really strong upon release, When they were first released, it was just 50% more damage with no downside, and they were just one of the best bullets in the game, because you load this into like the Gobi Scout Rifle and you have an amazing weapon. They're still very strong even after they got nerfed, like I don't know how many years ago, but they did whenever there was that update to the 308. I just remember that one specifically. I know they changed some other ones, but this one was definitely a standout, where this one now gives you 30% more damage for your 308 guns, but it breaks your weapons 50% faster. That's not such a downside. I would put this one right up into the Wasteland best. I think the 308 Jacketed Soft Points are one of the best bullets in the game still, even after that big nerf that they got after the initial release of New Vegas. The other part that really helps out with this is all 308 guns do really high damage. Even the automatic rifle, which has the lowest base damage out of any of the 308 guns, still has like base 40. So giving it 30% more damage is pretty good. If you put it into other weapons like the Gobi Scout Rifle, this machine, or like Paciencia, you have a very, very powerful weapon, and I would say these are just a straight upgrade to those weapons. Then we've got the 357 Jacketed Hollow Points. These ones actually give you nothing but a bonus to your weapon, where they give you 25% more damage, they punch through 3 armor, and they also make your gun 20% more accurate. There's no downside to using these. These are one of the best ones that you can get from handloader, so they're just going straight up to the Wasteland's best. They're really, really good in any gun. There are a couple of 357 weapons that are pretty good. The Cowboy Repeater maxed out is pretty good. The Long Carbine can be pretty good if you like that style of weapon. Lucky is really strong, so the Jacketed Hollow Points are really nice, especially since you can get handloader so early on. This is pretty strong. Then we've got 38 Special. 38 Special can be loaded into any 357 gun. The reason why this works is because in real life you can load 38 Special into most 357 guns, especially revolvers. You might have more of a trouble with some of the lever action guns that you can load it into. I would assume it would still work, but you might have feeding issues then, because they are a little bit shorter than the other, but it probably wouldn't matter that much. 38 Special is generally sold in bulk, which is pretty awesome, or you can buy these individually. 38 Special nerfs your damage by 25%. However, it breaks your weapon 25% slower too. So you're not really getting any worse mileage out of your gun than you otherwise would if you want to load 38 Special in, but you are having a nerf to your damage, and that can be kind of a turnoff for these weapons. They're not super difficult to fix though, so you don't really need to be worrying about the health, and if you get like lucky early on, 38 Specials can be pretty good to load it in. I think I'd put 38 Special into side grade because it's not really that much of a downside, and if you just want to use it against small enemies, especially if you're just doing like a lucky run or a Cowboy Repeater run only, or just any sort of early game run where you're using those weapons, then the 38 Specials are pretty decent. I don't tend to use them too much later because you have the 357 Jacketed Hollow Points, and those ones are just so good. Or sorry, Jacketed Flat Points. I put that as Jacketed Hollow Points tonight. It's Jacketed Flat Points, not Jacketed Hollow Points. A little bit of a different round there. Next, we've got the 44 Semi-Wad Cutters. 44 Semi-Wad Cutters you can get from the Handloader perk. However, they are the only special ammo that you don't need to have that perk to get. So you can get this if you go up north and talk to Jules. He's located just above New Vegas, and you have to pass a survival speech check, I believe, or maybe it's a gun speech check. I don't remember. And then he can also give you this recipe. So this one, somewhat similar to the 357 Jacketed Flat Points. This one gives you a bonus in damage where you get 20% more damage and you punch through 6 armor, and this comes with no other downsides. So that is a pretty big buff to the 44s. Like, just having a nice bonus to it is really good. There's only a few 44 guns in the game, where there's like Fido, which honestly is pretty good with these. The revolvers, whether that be the regular 44 or the Mysterious Magnum and the Trail Carbine. But all of these are a bonus, so I'd put this one right up into the Wasteland's best. Then we have 44 Special. This is also like the 38 Special, where this one also deals 25% less damage, but breaks your weapon 25% slower. I'd also put it in the side grade. It's not bad if you get it early on, because there are a couple places where you can rush and get a Trail Carbine or get a 44 without too much trouble. And if all you can buy is special rounds for it, they're going to be fine. Then we have the 45 plus P. The plus P stands for more powder in your gun, or more powder in the casing, I should say, so that you can have potentially a faster moving bullet. But this does beat up your gun a little bit more, just like it would in real life. So the 45 plus P gives you 10% more damage, punches through 2 armor, but breaks your weapon 20% faster. This is generally just a straight upgrade to the 45. I wouldn't really say that it's the best of the 45s, because we have 45 Super here, and even the regular 45 is pretty good. But I'd put it up in a Survivor's Choice. This one's pretty decent, at least if you can buy a decent amount of it. Vendors don't always sell a whole lot of plus P rounds, either for this or for the 9mm, but it's kind of cool. Then we have 45 super loaded rounds, which these ones give you 30% more damage, punch through 4 armor, but break your weapon 2.5 times faster. that can be kind of a hard sell for how much it breaks your weapon up. Good thing is that the 45 caliber guns actually do have good item health. A light shining in darkness is really good with this. The 45 pistol is pretty good with this. And the 45 submachine gun has the highest amount of DPS out of any of the submachine guns once you load this into them. So this one is really strong, but it will break your weapon pretty quick. So if you're okay with breaking your weapon really fast, I would say it's Wasteland's best, and I use it pretty often. But if you don't like that, maybe move it down to Survivor's Choice, because just loading regular 45 rounds in is pretty decent too. And then if you want to load the supers in just to spray down enemies with like the Tommy gun, it can be pretty nice. Then we've got the 4570 semi-wad cutters. These ones are somewhat similar to the semi-wad cutters that we've already talked about, although these ones do break your weapon quite a bit faster. So this gives you 20% more damage to your weapon, punches through 6 armor, and breaks your weapon 3 times faster. That can be kind of a downside. However, the guns that you're loading this into don't shoot very fast, since it's just the hunting revolver and the brush gun and their unique variants. And they do have decent item health, as well as they do a lot of damage per shot. So if you just want to buff the damage a little bit more and give them some armor breaking, these are really nice. I know some people just forego these entirely, though, just to load hollow points into either of those weapons, because hollow points will just give you a straight damage buff against, I think, everything in the game, besides maybe, like, Brotherhood members. They might actually have enough armor to where it doesn't actually give you a bonus, but for everything else, I'm pretty sure you will get a bonus with hollow point 4570s. So I'd put this one up into Survivor's Choice. It's pretty good. I like both of them. I like the regular 4570. I think they're really good. Usually I go with these ones, but if you want to go hollow point rounds or just regular 4570, you're going to have a pretty good time with any of those weapons. And then we've got all the 50 cal rounds. So we've got 50 cal explosive. This one's an easy, like, top tier. The 50 cal explosive round is absolutely insane. It just turns your already really powerful sniper rifle into a really powerful sniper rifle that can kill everything around it. It's basically the 40mm grenade explosion radius, roughly. And it's moving much faster and much straighter than that, so you get to your targets really fast. The only downside to the 50 cal explosive rounds is that you can hurt yourself in return with this, so you don't want to be shooting at a very close range. Just keep that in mind. So long as you're using this at long range, it is absolutely devastating towards everything you hit. You can take out crowds with this, you can take out big enemies with it. It is a 50 cal explosive round. I guess the only other downside is that these are kind of expensive, but vendors tend to sell a lot of them because they are in the Gunner's Arsenal DLC, so vendors are more likely to have them. They don't actually change your stats at all, though, either. They're just the same amount of damage that you normally have with the 50 cal. You just get an additional explosion radius with it. Then we have 50 cal incendiary rounds. 50 cal incendiary rounds also don't nerf your damage, so these are the same damage as the regular 50 cal, but they do give you slight damage over time. So this is 2 damage for 5 seconds. That's not a whole lot of fire damage. This also isn't affected by the Pyromaniac perk, so you can't just suddenly get more damage from this. You can buy these in pretty good quantities, and for some reason the Lonesome Road always seems to have a lot of them. But 50 cal incendiaries aren't incredible. You don't usually need them, so I just put them in side grade. If you want to light things on fire, by all means do it, and if you're just finding a bunch of them, you know, it's the same as regular 50 cal ammo. But I much prefer like the explosive 50 cal over this. And then we have the 50 cal match rounds. These ones can also be made with the hand loader perk. These ones make it so that your gun does 15% more damage than it otherwise would, and it makes your gun 35% more accurate, which sounds pretty good, but the 50 cal is already pretty much pinpoint accurate, so being slightly more accurate really doesn't matter even at very long ranges. 15% more damage is a buff though, so I'm going to put it in Survivor's Choice. Again, I usually go with the 50 cal explosive rounds, but if you want to load the match rounds in, by all means. I think you do need 100 repair in order to make them too, so they do take a decent amount of skill investment in order to make these. Next up we have 5mm, which this is going to substitute for both regular 5mm and 5mm jacketed soft points. 5mm by itself is unique, kind of in its own way, where it has 10 armor piercing on it by default, so it affects the assault carbine and the minigun even more, which is really good because they have low base damage, so this can really help them against most enemies. And I would put regular 5mm into the side grade. However, we're also using this as the jacketed soft points. Similar to the 308 soft points, these are really good too. These ones give you 30% more damage, still punch through 10 armor, but break your weapon 50% faster. That's really good. Weapons that take this, like the minigun and the assault carbine, generally have really high health and they don't break very fast, so even if they break a little bit quicker, it doesn't really matter. I would put them up here, although I should also mention 5mm armor piercing rounds also kind of have their own bonus effect where they get even more armor piercing than any of the other armor piercing weapon types, where they get up to minus 25. And that is really strong because that makes it so basically nothing can actually tank through that. You're going to be doing the same amount of damage, or roughly the same amount of damage as you normally would, but you're just going to shred right through everything. So 5mm armor piercing are also probably going up into the Wasteland's best because they are really nice too. Then we have 5mm surplus. You can buy these in large quantities, usually from people like the boomers or the gun runners. Surplus is not usually the best. Surplus breaks your weapons quite a bit quicker. They're also just lower grade overall. So this actually gives you 15% more damage, which is a buff, as well as they still keep the normal minus 10 armor piercing on it, so they don't get nerfed there. But they break your weapon 3 times faster, and they also make it so your weapon is 20% less accurate. 5mm surplus is honestly kind of fine to be using with the assault carbine or with the minigun. I like it better with the minigun than the assault carbine. I think it's kind of a waste in that one. But the minigun does have a decent amount of item health, so it doesn't break too fast. And if it's just something I'm just going to throw away, I don't usually use heavy weapons all that much, then I don't have a problem loading it in. But I'd probably put the 5mm surplus in the scrap metal. It's not really one of my favorites. Then we got 5.56 match rounds. 5.56 is one of the most versatile rounds in the game since it goes to so many guns and you can get it so early on. The match rounds are similar to the 50 cal match rounds where they give you 15% more damage and make your weapon 35% more accurate. Now that does actually matter with some of the 5.56 guns, like the light machine gun can definitely benefit from being more accurate. The other ones not so much, like the marksman carbine, the varmint rifle are already really accurate. I guess the service rifle benefits from this too. So match rounds are actually really solid in the 5.56 weapons. I'd put it up into the Wasteland's best. It's another one that you're going to need hand loader to get to. Then we've got 223. 223 can also be loaded into any 5.56 gun. Main reason for this is you can also do this in real life because this is the Imperial and the other one is the metric measurement. Yes, I know that they're a little bit different, and yes, I know you probably shouldn't be loading them into those guns in real life, at least into older guns, because the pressures can be a bit different. With modern guns, I've heard that's not such an issue, and you should probably be using the ammunition that is specified with the particular weapon. But either way, 223 is more of the common round. You can buy it in large bulk quantities, and 223 is kind of good. It makes it so you do 10% less damage, but you actually do 20% less damage to your gun. So you can buy a lot of these early on and make it so that the 5.56 weapons last even longer. You can load this into the service rifle and make it last quite a while, which is good. Varmint rifles don't break super quick, so it's pretty good there, and they're very common in the early game. Yeah, also, if you want to rush up to the boomer's place and grab a marksman carbine, 223 can actually be pretty good. So I'm going to put that in Survivor's Choice. It's kind of nice. Then we got 5.56 Surplus. You buy this in bulk. Surplus gives you 15% more damage, but breaks your weapon 3 times faster. So I don't really care for this as much. It's not bad if you just want to load into the service rifle that you can get down at the trading post. And that's perfectly fine. That's okay. But I don't use it that often, so I'd probably put this in the scrap metal as well. Then we've got 9mm plus P. 9mm plus P is powder plus, so this will give you more armor breaking and slightly more damage with the 9mm. This gives you 10% more damage, punches through 2 armor, breaks your weapon 20% quicker. This is kind of nice. It's good to throw it into like the submachine gun, assuming you can get enough of it, and it can be pretty decent in the 9mm handgun as well, or if you want to throw it into Maria. It's not one of my favorites because the jagged hollow points are a little bit better for the same sort of job, but it's okay. Jagged hollow points, both for, well, I guess jagged hollow points for all of these, the 9mm, the 10mm, and the 12.7mm are all the exact same. They are somewhat less damaging hollow points. They give you 65% more damage on your weapon as opposed to 75%, but instead of giving the enemy 3 times the amount of armor, they only give them 2 times the amount of armor. This on the 9mm is pretty decent most of the time. You load it into the submachine gun, and if you're only using it against non-armored enemies like Kazdors, it's really good. Handgun, also the same thing. So I'd put this in Wasteland or Survivor's Choice. Same thing goes with the 10mm. You load it up into Sleepy Time, and it's really good. You load it up into the regular 10mm SMG or the 10mm pistol. They're pretty decent options, as long as you're not fighting heavily armored enemies. The 12.7mm, on the other hand, I would actually say is higher, because the weapons do have high base damage there. So the jagged hollow points don't necessarily matter that they're giving the enemy more armor, especially if you load this into the survivalist rifle. I think it makes the best use of these. Submachine gun, it's kind of your choice if you want to be using this or not. I think it's pretty good. I think it's still pretty strong against most enemies. Pistol, like Little Devil, it can also be quite good. So that's why I would put that one a little bit higher than the 9mm or the 10mm, just because of the guns it loads into. Then we move on to the various 12 and 20 gauges. So we have regular 12 and 20 gauge because this one acts a little bit different, and it is a good kind of thing to start off with. They have 9 projectiles by default, which is pretty good. That makes it so your damage is spread out amongst those 9 projectiles, so you have a decent amount of spread. Spread is determined by the weapons, Weapons like the sawed-off shotgun are going to have a lot more spread than something like the hunting shotgun, which has a whole lot less, and these actually have bonus damage on them by default of 20%, which is interesting. I'm going to put this into the side grade because that is the normal ammunition that you load into the 20 or the 12 gauges, but even just regular shotgun shells can be really good in those weapons. Our next ammo is going to be the 12 gauge and the 20 gauge, which is the number 3 and the number 4. This refers to the size of the pellets that are actually going to be in the gun. So these actually do the same amount of damage as regular shotgun shells, but they reduce your overall pellets to 4. This doesn't nerf your damage though, because you still have the same amount of overall damage. This is just more damage per pellet, so it's better against armored enemies, and can be a bit better with spread depending on the gun that you're using it out of. It's a little bit worse if you want to run the perk and stay back, which that one is probably one of the strongest perks in the entire game, and it just counts each pellet as a chance to knock down enemies by 10%. So normally you have a very high chance of knocking down enemies. With the number 4 and number 3 shotgun shells, you don't have as much, simply because you have less pellets overall. So these ones can be a little bit worse, but they can also be decent. So I'm going to put them both into the side grade. They're better early on, but once you get that perk, they're going to be worse overall than regular rounds. Then we've got magnum rounds. These are also for shotguns. These both go to the 20 gauge and the 12 gauge. You can make these at any workbench. You can actually make them right away. You don't need a perk for it at all. And the magnum rounds actually give you more damage. They give you 10% more damage than regular shotgun shells. They do break your weapon 15% faster, and they punch through 2 damage thresholds. So these are better against armored. I think the magnums are generally just a straight upgrade to regular shotgun shells, and if you have end stay back, these are probably top tier because you don't lose out on pellets. You just get more damage. You can bully things even better, and they're just one of the best options for everything. Again, assuming you have that perk. If you don't have that perk, I'd probably move it down to Survivor's Choice. It's still an upgrade to the shotguns. It's just not as much of an upgrade. Then we've got the 12 gauge and the 20 gauge Magnum number 3 and number 4 buckshot rounds, which these ones are pretty much a combination of the rounds that we just talked about. So this will give you more damage, break your weapon quicker, and give you less overall pellets. If you're going with a shotgun build, this one is still really good, and I'd probably put it up into Survivor's Choice for both of these, but I would say just the regular Magnum rounds are better, simply because and stay back still works with them. If you don't have that and you just have Shotgun Surgeon and that's all you're using, then I would say that these ones can be better, especially on something like the hunting shotgun. Then I'd say this one is generally better, but again, with end stay back, the Magnum rounds not losing out on pellets is just really, really good. And then we've got a bunch of other shotgun shells here. So we have slugs. This also goes to the 12 and the 20 gauge. Slugs make it so that your shotgun is far more accurate, and all of your damage is condensed into one single slug. So it's better against armored enemies, and it gives you 55% less spread. This is actually really strong if you want to be loading it into something like the hunting shotgun or the lever action shotgun. You can still use it at a very long range, pretty much the same way you just use a rifle. So slugs are actually pretty good. I'd put them up into the Survivor's Choice. Unfortunately, you can't make slugs. I don't know why you can't. Pulse slugs are pretty much anti-robot rounds for this. These also go for the 20 gauge and the 12 gauge. And pulse slugs make it so you do reduce damage. This is reducing your damage by 30%. It does condense your round into just one single slug. And it does make them just as accurate as regular slugs, but it does give you an additional plus 50 damage towards robots normally, or plus 25 damage towards Old World Blue robots. This can be decent, but a lot of the time it's not really that great. The pulse slugs, I would probably put into the side grade. They're only really good against robots and power armor. And power armor enemies, I would still rather have Magnum rounds loaded into my shotgun. There's just not enough robots in New Vegas to actually make them that viable. They are in the Gunrunner's Arsenal DLC though, so vendors tend to sell a lot of them. It's just you don't always get to use a whole lot of them, so they're kind of in an awkward spot. And then we've got beanbags. This is only for the 12 gauge. All the rounds next are only for the 12 gauge, at least these 4. So beanbags make it so that you do only 5% of your total damage. So you nerf your damage heavily with these, but it does inflict 250 fatigue. Or at least it's supposed to. Fatigue damage is actually based off of your gun's damage too. So if you have a gun with high base damage, it actually does better with the beanbags than if you had a gun with low base damage. Either way, you're just using this to knock down enemies to knock them out. And if you have a perk like End Stay Back, which already does that with every ammunition, then beanbags really aren't that useful. Unless you're doing this in like a pacifist run. And even then, loading beanbags is only really viable once you load it into something like the riot shotgun. In the hunting shotgun, it's just not that great. In the sawed-off shotgun, they're actually pretty bad. So beanbags, I would say, is scrap metal. They're just not really worth taking. They're a cool concept. I do like them, but I really wish they would have been implemented a bit better in New Vegas so that they could have been something fun. Then we move on to the coin shot. And coin shot's pretty cool. You can make this at any workbench. This one actually gives you as much damage as magnum rounds, and it gives you armor breaking with no downside of breaking your weapon, so they're actually really good. It's just loading these are kind of a pain because you need the specific coins to load them in. You can't just load any Caesar's Legion coin into them. You do need specific coins. And anytime that you shoot somebody with a coin shot, you can actually get some of those coins back. You can either get the regular coin back or you can get mangled versions of the coin back. So coin shot, if you can actually get a lot of it, I would say is actually Wasteland best. It's arguably better than magnum rounds. It's not very practical to get though, because arguably the best way to get coin shot outside of just cheating it into the game is just going to casinos and exchanging your money for Legion coins, but exchanging them at lower rates, and it's just going to take you so long in order to get enough coins to make more coin shot. And I'm just not that patient. I'm just going to load magnum rounds into my gun because 12 gauge and 20 gauge are super common to buy from any vendor, and then I can just go to a workbench and make them. Then we got Dragon's Breath. Dragon's Breath also only goes to the 12 gauge. This one gives you 10% less damage, but it gives you 8 fire damage for 5 seconds. So you can do a little bit of fire damage to enemies. This one also isn't affected by Pyromaniac, sadly. I wish it was. This one I'd say is arguably just a side grade to regular 12 gauge. You don't really need it, but it is cool seeing something like the Riot Shotgun just blow fire out of the front of it. I do like that quite a bit. It doesn't really feel any different than just loading regular 12 gauge into the gun though. Even the damage over time effect will pretty much never matter. I like it in the double barrel too. The double barrel, it actually looks pretty cool in too when you fire both of the barrels. And then we have flechette rounds. This is our last shotgun shell. And flechette rounds make it so you do 10% less damage, give you 6 armor breaking, which is pretty good. And this reduces your overall projectiles to 5 projectiles. I'm also going to put them in the side grade. I usually wouldn't use them over slugs if I want armor breaking. I think that that's a little bit of a better option than them, but they're not bad at all. I don't mind loading them into the guns, especially into something like the Riot Shotgun. They're pretty decent, so I think I'd just keep them right there. I guess we got one more ballistic weapon, sort of, and that is nails. Nails are kind of unique because they only go to the nail gun, and this one always has armor breaking on it. So this one just always punches through 5 armor. I mean, I'm going to put it into the side grade just because it only goes to the nail gun, and it's the only ammo that the nail gun can have, so there's nothing really to compare it to. But having that is actually pretty nice on the nail gun, so they're decent. They're better than normal rounds in a lot of ways, especially for a submachine gun. To have armor breaking on it is pretty good. Then we move on to the energy weapons. First up, we got the regular cells, which is just the standard ammunition that energy weapons have, and they are kind of unique because even standard cells, whether they be the regular energy cells, the electronic charge packs, or the microfusion cells, these ones do regular damage with the weapon, but punch through 2 armor. So this is actually a pretty nice upgrade for energy weapons that they just have on any weapon by default. I would put this one into the side grade just because they are the standard ammunition for energy weapons, but they are a little bit better than standard regular ammunition, which is pretty cool, at least most of the time. Like we said, with like the 5mm, it's a little bit different, but most of the time these are pretty good. Then we have the overcharge cells. Overcharge cells you can buy from different vendors as well as you can make them on a workbench, which can be pretty good. And overcharge cells make it so that your gun will do more damage. This goes up to 25% more damage than regular cells. They break your weapon 50% faster though, and they do give you 5 armor breaking. So overcharge cells are generally an upgrade to regular cells. It depends on the weapon though. Energy weapons tend to not have very much item health. So overcharge cells are maybe not the best, but I would probably put them a tier higher into the survivor's choice. They are usually pretty good. Then we've got bulk cells. Bulk cells you can buy in bulk, which is nice, and these can be really good in the early game. They can also be good for any sort of automatic weapon. Bulk cells give you 15% reduction in damage, but they also break your weapon 15% slower. They don't actually have any armor breaking on them, so they're not quite as good as regular cells, but bulk cells are still decent. I think I'd put them into the scrap metal tier. They're probably on the high end of the scrap metal tier though, because I don't mind bulk cells at all, as opposed to these ones where I usually don't use them, besides like planking rounds. So it would definitely be on the high end here, maybe into the side grade, depending on which weapon you're loading them into. If you load them into like the Gatling laser, they can be pretty decent, or like the laser RCW, something that shoots pretty quick. Max cells give you the maximum amount of damage for energy weapons. These ones give you 50% more damage, but break your weapon 250% faster than they otherwise would, and they take away 10 armor from the enemy. So they're really good if you want to deal really high damage. Maxed out microfusion cells are really good when loaded into very high damaging weapons, like you load this into the Gauss rifle, you load it into the LAER if you want to kill things quickly, but it will break your weapon really fast. They're best used on weapons that you're not shooting very often, or saving these for the special occasions. So I'm still going to put them up into the Wasteland's best, because they are the best amount of damage and damage per second that you can do, but they are a little bit limiting overall compared to some of the other options that you have. Optimized cells are fantastic. You will need the Vigilant Recycler in order to get this one, but Optimized makes it so that you do 30% more damage, only break your weapon 10% faster, and they punch through 5 armor. These are just a straight upgrade over overcharged cells in pretty much every way. They don't break your weapon as quick, they do a little bit more damage, they have the same armor breaking, and these are like my preferred cells to be loading into energy weapons. Max cells can still be really good in certain situations, but they are way more situational than optimized. Optimized are almost always just an upgrade over everything else, so I would put them up there. Besides, like, again, maybe max cells if you specifically need to hit something really hard, like you want to load this into the tri-beam laser or the Gauss rifle. Optimized for basically everything else. Then we got flamethrower fuel, and we have just 2 of these. So we have the homemade flamethrower fuel, which homemade flamethrower fuel is awkward, to say the least. You can make this at a campfire, and this one actually has no upside to it whatsoever. It just breaks your weapon 3 times faster. That's pretty bad, since the fire weapons don't really need that. They don't always have the most amount of item health. Flamethrowers and the heavy flamer have okay amounts of item health. I guess it's okay if you want to load it into the flare gun, because you don't really care about the health with that, since you're probably just using it to scare off Deathclaws and Tunnelers. So, yeah, homemade is going to go to the scrap metal. I think it's one of the worst, if not the worst, special ammo that you can get in New Vegas. It's just terrible. There's no upside to it at all. At least should do some more damage, or maybe burn a bit faster in the flamers or something like that. Optimized flame, on the other hand, is much better. Optimized fuel gives you more damage and punches through armor. This gives you 30% more damage, punches through 5 armor, and only breaks your weapons 10% faster. So these are actually really good. It's just that there's not a whole lot of fire weapons that'll use this. However, on a fire weapons build, it's going to be the Wasteland's best, because they're the same as like optimized cells, just for weapons like the flamethrower and the heavy incinerator. And the incinerator's pretty good with these. A flare gun, I wouldn't even bother putting this in. Probably just put regular ammo or even the homemade fuel into it, because again, you're not really going to be using that as a weapon, unless you want to torture yourself, in which case I guess you could. The high explosive 25mm. You can buy these from vendors. They are sold by vendors pretty often. This gives you 35% more damage and gives you a 36% larger explosion radius. There's no downside to this, so this one's actually really good, so long as you're okay with the 25mm explosion radius, which you should be, because they're not too large. It's not one of the weapons I usually blow myself up with too much. There's only 2 25mm weapons with this, and that's the APW and the grenade machine gun, but both of them are really good, so I'm going to put this up into Wasteland Best. Then we have the 25mm plasma rounds. These ones you can buy from the Gunner's Arsenal expansion. You can buy these from a bunch of different vendors, but plasma rounds give you 30% more damage, but nerf your AoE radius by a little bit, so you can't explode as much, but if you're more precise, these actually do a huge amount of damage. So these ones can be pretty good too. I don't like them as much as the high explosive rounds, but I would still probably put them up here in Wasteland Best, because if you can get them, you might as well use them. If you can't get them, that's still fine. The regular 25mm are pretty good too. Then we've got 25mm pulse rounds. These are actually different than something like pulse slugs. These nerf your damage heavily. This actually cuts your damage down to just 8%, which is incredibly low. It's basically the same as like the beanbags at that point, but it does give you 75 damage towards robots, which is pretty good, and 30 damage towards power armor. It also nerfs your AoE radius by a lot. It's by 60%, so this is a much smaller explosion radius. You can't really hurt yourself with this unless you're wearing power armor, but again, it's only going to be good against robots. Robots aren't super common. If you do want to load up the APW and take it to Old World Blues, it's decent, so I'd put it into side grade, but it's not really the best. Then we have 25mm timed rounds. These ones are kind of weird because they don't actually nerf or buff your damage at all, nor your AoE radius. It's always the same, but these do have a 5-second fuse on them, so after 5 seconds, they're guaranteed to go off. On the 25mm, this is just not necessary. I'd put this into like the scrap metal tier. These are just kind of awkward to be using because a lot of the time I'll be trying to shoot the 25mm further away and these won't go quite far enough. Or when I try to shoot them directly at an enemy, they hit the enemy and then take a second to go off. In which case they're doing basically the same thing as the regular 25mm. I'm just slightly reducing my DPS because of the detonation time that goes off on these. So yeah, 25mm timed I just don't find all that great. They're not one of the better timed explosives. I guess they're better than something like the time bombs, but basically everything's better than the time bomb in most situations. Then we've got the 40mm grenades, where first up we have 40mm incendiary. 40mm incendiary makes it so that you do 30% less damage, and you have a 40% smaller explosion radius, but it does do damage over time. This is 6 damage for 15 seconds of fire damage. The incendiary rounds can be decent. I'm going to put them in side grade, but I don't use them very often. The main reason for this is that they also cause a lot more lag in game because it has to render in all the fire and everything burning and the damage over time. So if you're shooting this into large crowds, it can just freeze up your game for a few seconds before it loads in. Even more so if you have a mod like the larger packs mod, where you can spawn in up to 10 times the amount of enemies or 9 times the amount of enemies in total. And then this one really lags your game, and I do not like it then. It's really bad then. Then we've got 40mm plasma rounds. These ones give you more damage, but cut your AoE radius. This is the same as the 25mm. I'd also put them up into Wasteland Best. You can buy these from quite a few different vendors. A lot of vendors sell them because they're part of the gunner's arsenal. You do more damage with them. The regular 40mm explosives are quite good though too, so I don't use them as often as those. But if I do load plasma rounds in, I'm never really disappointed with them. They're still pretty good. Pulse rounds are the exact same as the 25mm, and I'd also put them in side grade. If you want to rush Old World Blues with them, then they can be okay. For everything else, they're going to be basically useless. They do actually do more damage against robots and against power armor than the 25mm, and they don't have such a nerf in explosion radius, but it's still kind of the same job for the same sort of weapons. They can be okay, but only in specific situations. Then we've got missiles, where we have the high explosive missile. High explosive missiles just have more damage on them. They don't actually give you a bigger explosion radius, weirdly enough. It's just 35% bonus to the damage. So this one would also go into Wasteland Best. They're really nice to have. Then we have the missiles with the high velocity. Missiles with high velocity are the exact same as regular missiles. It's just they move 3 times faster than what a normal missile does. These are actually really good, especially if you're doing an explosives only run. I love taking these for my long-range first engagement because I can shoot these and I don't really need to lead my missile very much. It's also really good for just judging the render distance too, because after a certain amount of time, the missiles will just disappear. So firing a high-velocity missile at whatever I'm trying to hit is a really good way to judge the amount of total distance. So I'd also put this up into Wasteland Best. It's just such a nice quality of life bonus to the missile launcher. Then we have missile hive rounds, which this is basically a shotgun version of the missiles. These ones make it so you do vastly reduced damage, at only 17.5% damage with each missile. However, you do get 9 missiles in total, but those missiles have a 20 times spread on them, so they are very inaccurate. If you just want to cover a large area and you're fighting something like small Kazdors, other enemies that don't move particularly fast, missile hives can actually be pretty fun, but they're usually not much of an upgrade over just high explosive missiles or high velocity missiles. Most of the time they're a downgrade over just the standard missiles. So I'm going to put them in side grade just because they can be useful against certain enemy types, especially if you're high up on something and just dropping these down on them, just like most explosive weapons are pretty strong in those areas. This one is not really one of my favorites. It is very cool to look at, but it's not really that great of a weapon to actually be using, especially if you're going to use it against something big. If you're using it against Deathclaws, I'd probably put it like right down in the side grade. Take the high explosives or take the high velocity rounds for that. Then we have all the mini nukes. So first up we have the Big Kid mini nuke, which the Big Kid mini nuke gives you more damage. It's 30% more damage for your Fat Man, which is a huge buff in damage for the Fat Man, which already has a massive amount of damage. This also increases your area radius by about 30%, so bigger explosion. And just like all of these, they apply rads over time. This one is awkward to use, I would say. This one, I'm going to put in Survivor's Choice because I think it's a little bit better than a mini nuke normally for the Fat Man. The main problem is explosion radiuses with the Fat Man are very scary. If you're still inside the blast radius of the Fat Man, there's a good chance it just straight up kills you, which is not good. You can kind of help that with perks like Hit the Deck, or if you have Esther, which gives you damage threshold towards explosives. If you're wearing heavy armor, that can kind of help. You want to be lobbing this as far away from you as possible, and only use this in big open areas, pretty much outdoors. There are a couple indoor locations you could probably get away with using it, but most of the time just use it outside. Big Kid is meant to be used outside. These are also very expensive. All of these are very expensive for the mini nukes, compared to, well, basically all the other ammos that we've talked about so far. Then on the opposite side of the spectrum, we have low yield. Low yield actually nerfs your damage, it nerfs your AoE. That doesn't usually matter for the Fat Man though. It still does really high damage, it still has a very big explosion radius. I would also put this one actually in Survivor's Choice. I think this one is generally an upgrade from regular mini nukes, because they are a little bit more controllable. If you want to be trying to use this indoors, this is an okay option. It's not as good as the timed ones that we'll talk about here in a second, but it's not bad. And speaking of that, the timed ones are up next. These ones do the same exact damage as regular mini nukes, but they do have an explosion delay on them. And I would actually put this in Wasteland best. The timed mini nukes are really good because it does allow you to use the Fat Man indoors. You can shoot this, run back away, and you're usually far enough away to where it won't kill you. You can also kind of use the Fat Man now as an improvised sniper rifle with this, and it does a really high amount of damage if you want to hit things directly with it. So it can be really good there. It can still be rather awkward. These ones just make the Fat Man a little bit less awkward overall. And then we have Tiny Tots for whenever you wanted the Merv, or just an explosive shotgun in general. So the Tiny Tots make it so you only do 20% damage with each of your Fat Man minelets, I guess. But this does shoot out 9 projectiles in total, so you can do more damage. It also has the 20 times spread similar to the Hive rounds that we talked about not too long ago. This one I'd also put into the side grade. These can be really cool. They are very spectacular. They are very fun to use. They're not the most practical, though, in the game. I would say the timed mini nukes are the most practical, and then something like regular mini nukes or the big kids or the low yield are a bit better in most situations. But if you're standing up on something high and you're just raining down a bunch of mini nukes on enemies, it is incredibly satisfying, especially a bunch of little ones where you just see all of the explosions going off. They're great. And then our last ammos are the rockets. Rockets go specifically to the red glare, and we have the high explosive rockets. So high explosive just give you more AoE radius by 40%. That's actually pretty good. I'd put this one up in the best for the red glare. They're actually really good. The red glare is already pretty solid overall as a weapon, but it does have its own unique ammos, and if you can get a bunch of high explosive rounds, then they can be pretty nice. They are kind of expensive to buy though. And then we have the incendiary rounds. Incendiary rounds nerf your damage by 25%, and then they give you 2 fire damage for 8 seconds. I don't really like these. I'm going to put them in side grade because they're okay against certain enemy types, especially if you're spamming this out, which you are going to be with the red glare because that's just how it works. But against other enemy types, especially armored enemies, I don't really like the incendiary rockets. I'd rather just have regular rockets most of the time with the red glare. High explosive are preferred, but incendiaries just aren't that great. And I think this is where I'd put all of the different ammos in Fallout New Vegas. There is a lot of them, as you can see, and I would say try to experiment with these. The Handloader perk and the Vigilant Recycler perk definitely help with this, as well as I guess Mad Bomber kind of helps too, because it unlocks more recipes for explosives. However, it's not really new recipe ammunitions for any of the regular explosives. It's more like thrown and placed explosives, but all of those are pretty good. Tell me your thoughts on the different ammos in New Vegas. What are your favorite, and what are your favorite weapons to load them into? Thank you guys so very much for watching this. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.